Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Wealth Preservation Podcast. I'm Mark Seither.
And I'm Josh Saunders. Mark and I love learning about business, entrepreneurship, and how people started, grew, and preserved what they have worked so hard for. We have all made some cringeworthy mistakes in life and in business, and we want to help entrepreneurs and business owners avoid those pitfalls.
But while there's no blueprint for definitive success or failure, we can rely on the stories of other entrepreneurs for the lessons on how they launched and scaled up their business.
Some of the questions we love answered on each episode are, what mistakes have you made? What would you do differently in life and business? And what would you outsource first?
So, come join us as we hear from entrepreneurs around the globe on topics such as their origin story, how they innovated in their industry, and the advice they feel aspiring entrepreneurs need to hear today.
We also like to have a little fun. So you hope you enjoy this episode and it inspires and encourages you.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Wealth Preservation Podcast. Very excited for today's guest. Mac, how about you introduce yourself, your company, and where you're based out of?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Mac Bartine. I'm the CEO of SmartRIA. And SmartRIA is a compliance management platform for wealth managers, primarily in the U.S.
So we're having a compliance guy on. Compliance and wealth managers tend to butt heads, but we're going to keep it friendly. I'm not going to go into any aggressive like, hey, why do you hate approving business? we typically refer to the compliance department as the anti-business bureau. It's like, but I do love it because they keep me out of jail, right? So.
That's actually one of the things that attracted me to this industry is sometimes there are problems that startups are solving that are kind of made up. This is a real problem. And, our goal is to help people in your position to be less hating of compliance and more just like, okay, good, that's done.
Yes, well, really excited to get into that. But as always, I mean, our regular listeners know we want to get to know the entrepreneur before we get to know the business. And so we're in this episode we're really going to dive into what made Mac, right? So we'll jump way back. I mean, when you're was 8-year-old Mac thinking like I'm going to fix the compliance industry, or what what were you like as a kid? Were you entrepreneurial from the get-go?
So when I was a kid, there were 4 things that I wanted to be. Some kids want to be a fireman, some kids want to be an astronaut, etc. I liked entrepreneurship. I thought being an entrepreneur would be cool. I liked music, I liked art, and I liked psychology. Those 4 things are still subjects that I'm really passionate about. It's just that only one of those was right for me to make a living with.
Well, entrepreneurs do have to have I'd say a high degree of creativity. I mean, that's not my opinion. I mean, I've listened to quite a few people talk on this, where kind of fits in with your, hey, I wanted to go with either art or music, right? I mean, that creative gene, you got to be. You can't be a by the book pencil pusher and well, I mean, maybe you can as an entrepreneur, but it's definitely more tough. The creative space is huge for the entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Well, were you exposed to? I mean, I'd say 8 years old is probably pretty early on for saying, hey, I think the entrepreneurial route's for me. Did you have entrepreneurial parents or?
So, my dad is nuclear physicist and my mom is a professional musician. And I kind of grew up a mix of them, where, I liked things that were creative and I also liked things that were logical. And today it's really a mix of the two.
That is quite the combo, nuclear physicist and musician. Josh, I don't come from a nuclear physicist or musician. Well, I guess my dad's kind of a musician.
Mark, I know and love your parents, and neither of them are nuclear physicists. Neither am I. So.
Yeah, I mean that's. Did your mom play professionally, or did she?
She was an opera singer. and she also was a choir director and also gave music lessons, voice and piano.
Wow. All right. And then did your dad? So real quick. I mean, it wasn't really on today's agenda, but just curious. So your dad, I mean, was he a professor? Did he work? Where did he work?
He worked at Oak Ridge National Lab. So he was he had his PhD in nuclear physics, and so he was higher up at the lab and managed teams. And actually, he's working for the federal government, and that's about as non-entrepreneurial as you can get. But his job was to get money for research that needed to happen, and that was a fairly entrepreneurial process. And listening to him go through the process of making a case for this deserves to be funded, and bringing those people to our house. He brought people from all over the world into our house when we were kids, scientists who wanted him to help them fund their research and who wanted to do research at his lab. And so it was fun.
So, I mean, with that family breakdown, I mean, would you say, did your parents encourage you to like, hey, go invent your own thing, go do your own thing? I mean, did they kind of push you in that direction, or was that just always kind of your drive?
No, my parents were worried about me when I was a kid because I was all over the place, and they just hoped that I went to college and could pay my own way and all that kind of good stuff. So they were very supportive, and anything that I wanted to, like they got me music lessons and art lessons and all of that kind of stuff. But yeah, they were really happy when I finished grad school.
So where did you go to? Did you stay local, Knoxville area for college, or where did you take your college career?
I went to Berry College. It's a small liberal arts school in Rome, Georgia. It's about an hour outside Atlanta, for undergrad. And then I went to the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga for grad school.
I am new to Tennessee, so I have not been able to venture down to Chattanooga yet. I hear
it's a fun city. You'll like it.
I hear it's fun. I hear it's like I think it's trying to take over what Denver was like eight or 9 years ago, where it was like the young professionals hub. And if you were young, single, get to Chattanooga. Like,
yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a good place for young professionals for sure.
And it's a pretty city. It's gorgeous right there on the river and everything. We like it down there. Yeah, it's really nice.
Yep.
So, Matt, we kind of always have this conversation with entrepreneurs is like, do you think college is necessary in today's day and age? And that's not a pro or anti-education. Is there better ways to get education? Do you need to go to college? Does it depend on if you want to be a hard science guy or an engineer, or, kind of what are your thoughts on that?
I don't know about you guys, but I was like, I still am an introvert. And so I'm still very internally oriented in terms of my thought processes and all that kind of stuff. But I just didn't get people when I got to college. Like I had a couple of friends and, I needed the socializing process and getting to understand other folks. And I was interested in them. Like I said, I liked psychology, but I needed that experience to help me to be ready for the work world. And I think a lot of people need the experience of being around others who are working to create their future and thinking about that and talking about that. Going through, hopefully, I always encourage kids to take internships or co-ops or whatever they can get like that, so they're getting practical experience while they're getting their education. Now, that said, there are some really great programs for well-paying blue-collar jobs. There are some great programs for, just like straight out of high school or before you're done with high school. Take this coding boot camp and you can make $50,000 a year immediately, or 80 or 90, depending on where you live.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that's a pretty darn good living for your first job.
Right.
And so I think you can make the case for if someone is a really mature young person and they know what they want and it's a specific program and they can go for it and be as adult as it's possible to be at that age,
Sure.
then maybe they don't need college. But I think it's good in general.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I guess for your experience, I mean, because you mentioned like, hey, it was really good for me to get that, kind of get that, that socialized aspect. When you left college, was there kind of a, we've had some people on the show, they're like, as soon as I got out of college, it was like, what do I do now? Right? Did you have some of that rough transition?
Well, I went straight from college into grad school, so that made it a little easier. My rough transition was after I finished grad school, because I had been a musician for pretty much my entire memory.
Yeah.
Like when earliest I can remember, my mom was teaching me how to sing and play piano. And I should be a much better musician right now than I am since I started that young. But I wanted to play music and see if I could play music and make a living. And I knew that I wanted to do it then as opposed to try to do it later. So straight out of grad school, that's what I tried to do. So it was a little bit bumpy, but it was fun.
So I gotta know what kind of band did you play in, or what kind of did you tour or anything like that? How far did the music career go?
We didn't really tour. We played regionally, and we opened up for some well-known acts.
Yeah.
The Indigo Girls. We opened up for Driving and Crying.
Oh, nice.
So there were some bands that people know that we got to play with, and that felt like a pretty big deal to us. But we still didn't really make any money. So.
Yeah, right.
Much farther than I made it with any music career. So that's
Mark, you do have the story of you buying GarageBand on your MacBook.
I bought a MacBook because I was like, it's gonna have GarageBand, and as soon as I recorded one thing, I was like, yeah, I'm just gonna transition. Yeah, that's a bad idea.
Yeah, not to bash on Apple, but GarageBand is not the best program, in my opinion.
That was my problem, Josh. I needed a better program, and then I went. I think it was a combination between GarageBand and lack of skill, and a terrible singing voice. Those three combined, I mean, maybe if I'd thrown in some auto-tune.
Yeah, it's GarageBand's fault.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is funny. Like I think, you kind of go back to that, and it always seems like every entrepreneur kind of has had like that thing they've kind of, I don't know if I'd say failed at, because that's not like the right word, but they weren't like successful at something, right? And it was like, hey, I did this thing, it didn't work out amazing, right? But I pivoted, right? That's always the big part, right? It was like, okay, well, I tried this thing and I really gave it a good go, and I figured out it just wasn't for me. But everybody's like, but I really learned a lot from that, right? It was almost like that was like almost as important as succeeding, because that was like the steps to success, right? Does that make sense?
It does, and I think that learning how to work is a superpower.
Yeah.
It's one of the superpowers that you can actually learn, and learning how to persevere is a really good superpower too. But also you have to be willing to fail. If you're not willing to fail, that's pretty limiting. You
Yeah.
have to do something really easy. So yeah, I failed quite a bit.
Yeah.
Well, let's dive into failure. I mean, what a great transition. I mean, because I know you had to, I snooped your LinkedIn a little bit, right? And it did, you did have a couple things that you launched early on. What were some of those first, or what was your first thing that you launched on your own? You're like, hey, I've got this idea. I'm gonna launch this.
So my first real job, once I'd mostly given up the dream of being a rock star, was working for a software startup.
Okay.
I took a lot of statistics in grad school, and this was a statistical process control software startup. So I was there working in sales and marketing. Company didn't succeed. I was not a fantastic employee, but it was a learning experience, and it really, really, really like sunk the startup bug deep into my soul. I mean, like when I finished that, I knew that it was something that I wanted to do. So I wound up going into higher education, which was a great fit for me. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the atmosphere. But while I was doing that, I was also, I had a side hustle. And so I had about 12 years of side hustles. And one of those was Knoxville Business. That was pretty continuous through that period. So knoxvillebusiness.com, and then knoxvilljukebox.com, which was music streaming startup before Spotify, and it failed mostly because it was really easy to be hacked, and people kept on hacking it, and that was that was before people. Well, that was before I knew anything about how to deal with that. But at any rate, it was a great learning experience, and really, I learned marketing, I learned sales, I learned how to manage budget and all of that kind of stuff. And so it was really kind of what I cut my teeth on.
Yeah. I think sometimes when you go through some of those things where you're not as successful in the business, but you have to learn all those skill sets, right? Like, because, to be a business owner, I mean, you have to kind of know a little bit of everything, right? Like you can't just be like the one guy, because HR will eat you up, or marketing will eat you up, or, if you're just a really good technician. And so I think over time you kind of learn some of those skill sets, and it's almost like you kind of have to go through all of that before you're actually able to make it to the big leagues, right? You have to kind of like flounder in the minor leagues a little bit before you're ready to really, do well at the big time.
And some people
right?
don't need that, but I certainly did.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the entrepreneur that, the 22-year-old startup entrepreneur is pretty rare, that's crazy successful at 22. That's not pretty rare, right? They might just happen to have a good idea. And again, some of that's just luck and timing, right?
Yes.
And, you just kind of hit that, and other formulas, other ideas take longer as they kind of, kick off. Kind of when you were, kind of doing the startup thing, was there anybody that really like kind of helped you launch your companies that you turn to kind of for advice, or is it kind of, or any books you read, or kind of what was kind of helped form who Mac was?
I did read a lot of business books. I also went to local business mentoring offices. Back then, the Knoxville entrepreneurial community was not what it is today.
Okay.
It's actually a pretty vibrant community today, especially for a city the size of Knoxville. But I did seek out the people who were willing to talk to me, and learned some. I read lots of books, and just a lot of trial and error.
Always, right? That's always like you got to kind of just keep figuring it out until you meet the right. So Was there anybody here locally, or what were some of the books that you read? Is there anything that kind of like, you're like, oh wow, this like rocked my world. This was awesome type thing.
I read so many books that I don't know I would single any one book out.
Right.
I was just pretty constantly looking for something that could be helpful. And, if there was one little thing that was actually helpful, I was really happy. I was happy with that. A lot of business books are 200 pages of justification for 1 page of information.
Right. Yeah. that one nugget that's in there. Right.
Yeah. So I read a lot of justification and got a few nuggets.
Well, now I don't feel so bad when I get like 3/4 of the way through a book and I'm like, I feel like I'm reading the same thing over and over at this point. Like sometimes you do reach that point where you're like, did I go back a chapter or two? Well, I guess instead of picking out one particular book, was there something that maybe at the time you didn't realize you were making a mistake, but then like after reading a couple books and after, going through a couple businesses, you look back and you're like, wow, what was I thinking with that? That was not that I would do it differently, but that was a huge mistake.
Yeah. The biggest mistake that I made as a young entrepreneur was I tried to do it on my own. I was certainly not thinking that I wanted to do it on my own indefinitely. I wanted to build a company, but I tried to build a company on my own without the resources I needed to succeed. I didn't think about resources of any kind. I just thought about, I want to make progress, and it's a fine way to learn, but it's not necessarily a great approach to building a business.
After about your 10th cup of espresso for the day, you're like, maybe someone else could take some of this off my plate.
Yeah. The first startup that I tried to launch was a company called Give2Net. If you remember the very beginning of popular internet, there was a company called Go2Net. So I had Give2Net, and it was a marketplace for startups to interact with for-profit businesses and support each other in various ways. Okay. So it was like number 70,000 something in the world for traffic. So it got pretty decent traffic, but back then it was really expensive to run a company, or at least for me, I was pretty poor. Right. It was pretty expensive to run a startup to provide all the resources that it needed. And I had traffic, but I still hadn't figured out how to get people to give me money. And, so that pretty popular website wound up turning into, I just let the domain go. So it was, that's an example of trying to do it by yourself and not thinking about the resources that you need before you start and all of that kind of stuff.
Which I mean, that's another thing that's come up, on this podcast before too, where, an entrepreneur will be like, well, I wanted to get my thing out there and at least get it going. And it wasn't until later that I was like, okay, now how do I make money? And a couple of people have been like, oh, I was hemorrhaging money at first. I was just excited to have a client, right? Looking back at that experience, I mean, obviously 70,000, ranked 70,000 for traffic on the World Wide Web is impressive, right? Is there anything that you think, if you were to be doing something similar to that, right, that you'd say like, hey, what advice would I give younger me for like, hey, here's what you got to start thinking of at the very beginning if you want to ever try and monetize this?
So I definitely would recommend to younger me that I find a partner or two, and also that, well, it was a side hustle, so I didn't quit my day job, but, maybe be prepared for it was going to be more expensive than I thought. And how are you going to deal with that? Well, easier to say in hindsight.
and kind of the psychology around that too, like, after going through that, right? I mean, did you have anyone where like your next business launch, they were like, hey, Mac, remember how you dumped all that time and money into that thing and then just let the domain go? You sure you don't want to just be a W-2 guy? Like, did you have anyone kind of, feeding that side of the, side of the argument?
Um, in general, no. Uh, you know, another thing that I didn't do well was listen to other people. I really felt like I knew everything I needed to know, and I wanted to just go do it. And how wrong could I have been? Pretty damn wrong. But it took me a while to appreciate the value of experience and other points of view and that kind of stuff. So basically, I think the story so far is that I made pretty much every major mistake that you can make as an entrepreneur, and it went on for a while.
You're like, my head hurts from hitting brick wall after brick wall, but I'm still going.
Yeah, but right, I mean, I don't know. I think that you go back to that perseverance, and you have the ideas, and you got to keep grinding, right? You got to keep doing, And Mark and I kind of, we poo-poo on the hustle culture, and there's lots of people like, oh, you just keep grinding, keep going, but when you see problems, you want to fix them. You want to keep figuring out those problems to fix them. And I think there's that also a certain point that a lot of us get to, especially as entrepreneurs, and you're like, I don't know if I'd be a really good employee. I'm kind of unmanageable currently. Not in a bad way where you're not a good person. You're just, I just wouldn't be a very good employee. I would hate it, right? It's not the company I'm working for. It's that I would hate myself, and I'd be like, I don't want to do that anymore. Kind of.
Yeah. I think that once you become an entrepreneur, it's really, really, really hard to go back to a paycheck.
Yeah.
Maybe a good test for if someone's going to be a good employee or a good entrepreneur is just stick them in a room with a lever that says, don't pull this lever. And whoever pulls it is the entrepreneur. Like, why not? Like, I didn't want to pull the lever until you told me not to.
Yeah.
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 Pretty much what would happen there.
I was always like, hey, I want to fix this, or I want to make it better. And you get caught in the bureaucracy of like, oh, I can't make it better. And, I would want to spend 100 hours trying to fix that, but I wouldn't get paid for it. So is that really a good use of my time? And the boss really wouldn't care. You just kind of like, so you're always fighting not only yourself, but the company, the culture. And that's not a bad thing, because you're just like, I'm just so used to jumping in and fixing something. Like, when I see a problem in my business, I get to go fix it, right? I get to,
right.
Good or bad, I get to go put all my time, effort, and resources into solving the problem. And that makes me happy, right? Like, someone else, like, what did you waste all that money for? Like, I don't know. That was just bugging the heck out of me. I just had to fix that thing. I couldn't, or I had to solve that problem, or I had to do X, Y, Z.
Yep, absolutely.
So you just kind of become, I think, Mark, that was Brett Owens. It was like, he's like, yeah, I've had 2 startups and I'm literally unemployable now. Like, I could work for nobody. Like, it would just be, I'd be the worst employee ever.
So, he would pull all the levers. Yes.
Yeah. And that's not a bad thing. It's just, your brain just kind of gets wired like that. And you're like, I just can't do it. I have other things I want to do, or I change focus, or I do the next thing.
Yeah.
So, kind of just to recap, how many startups have you been kind of a part of?
Maybe 10.
So basically, you're a psychopath is what we're talking about. You're kind of just crazy.
Yeah. Usually people get through like 3 or 4. They're like, usually it's their spouse that's like, no more. You're done with the startup. Like, I know that you love it. I hate it.
Yeah.
Yeah. That definitely happens.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And, to be clear, maybe 10 that I was involved with, not
Sure.
necessarily ones that I started.
Yeah.
But about that many startups, and about half that many that I started or led.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and then shifting to like SmartRIA, right? I mean, what was it about? I guess what was the catalyst? You being like, hey, this is, because you're probably like many entrepreneurs, and you have like 3 business ideas before breakfast, right? What was it about SmartRIA that you're like, okay, this isn't just an idea; it's actually something I want to chase down? And what was the catalyst for you actually going with that as a business?
So I was working in another startup at the time that SmartRIA came across my path. And my partner, who I was launching the startup with, was making $300 an hour in his day job. And, you know, I loved him then. I love him now, but he wasn't all that motivated.
Mm-hmm.
And I really wanted to be in something that was me and someone else. I had learned that lesson by then. So, I sold Knoxville business and had some money, and it gave me an opportunity to start to do some small investing and mentor some other startups. And so I was one of the people who was approached when the original founder of SmartRIA, who's a local guy named Roger Kiger. He runs an SEC registered RIA here in Knoxville.
Mm-hmm.
So he had the original idea for kind of an all-in-one solution that was solving all of his technology problems, not just compliance. And he was trying to spin that out into a business. He had spent a fair amount of money and time doing that, and he was ready to say, okay, it's time for me to quit or to hand it over to someone else. So I was one of the people they spoke with, and I liked the business. I liked the problem. By that point in time, they knew that the focus should be compliance. So we really honed in on that, and it was kind of a love at first sight for me, because it was such an obvious problem that being a guy who has tended to be, don't tell me what to do in my attitude towards life, I knew that compliance was something that really frustrated people, and that the federal government, while their intentions may be good, didn't necessarily always make things logically or easy to follow. And so it just looked like a great problem to tackle.
And the SEC is even better. I mean, that is just a well-run, straightforward organization, just top notch.
At the time of this recording, the new advertisement rules, have been launched, and you have until later this year to adopt them. And man, if they could have made that any less clear, I don't think they could if they tried.
I think they were trying with the new advertising rules to like, hey, we're really going to have to find some people to make some money. So we're just kind of going to make them vague so we can find some people to generate some revenue. And then by that time, we'll have it figured out.
After hearing like what they were talking about, I was like, so basically if I go order a coffee, I should be like, I'd like a black coffee. By the way, I'm a financial advisor. This transaction does not warrant, almost give a disclosure anytime I make any talk to any human. Yeah. Which, and for our listeners too, can you maybe give a breakdown of what things were like pre-SmartRIA, and basically that thing you said, hey, I knew this was a huge need, right? What was that pain point specifically that you saw SmartRIA as the that niche to go in and fix?
Well, so the specific problem really was that compliance was confusing, and it wasn't just confusing, it was also broad. You couldn't put your thumb on compliance because it was much too broad to be able to do that. it's like a hydra. You cut one head off and another one pops up.
Right.
There are always more problems to solve in compliance, and so that sounded like a startup with job security to me.
Yeah.
There are always going to be compliance problems because there are always going to be people who want to, protect society, and also people who want to tell people what to do, and all of those motivations that go into our government's decision making.
Right.
But I just really saw it as getting to the chase of our industry. You guys are protecting and growing the wealth of this generation, hopefully in support of future generations. It's a really important job.
Yeah.
And it's more difficult because there are rules in place to protect your clients. And, it's a good thing to protect your clients, but it's not a good thing to stop you from succeeding in business while protecting your clients.
Right.
So to me, it was like, I can help these people who are helping other people. And there was a trickle down effect to how many people I can help with that process. And ultimately that's what is really, really cool about technology is you can help people at scale.
Yeah. That's beautiful.
And I can neither confirm nor deny if I will be changing our compliance officer's name to Hydra in my phone.
Maybe we will.
Maybe.
I think every compliance officer's answer to everything is, I don't know. We'll see. Maybe.
Or just no.
Well, and you put yourself in their position.
Yeah.
The buck does stop with them. They're the first person to get in trouble if something is screwed up and they didn't address it. And it's a genuinely head scratching problem. Like you could say, "Can I do this?" And you're like, "Geez, man, I don't freaking know. I've got to spend some time looking at that and thinking about it."
Right.
It's a tough job.
Yeah.
I read this enforcement letter and it said this thing, but I read another one and it said this other part, and we're in the middle kind of, and which side do I err on? Yeah. Oh yeah. No, I could not be a compliance officer. So all the power to them. They're the blessing and the curse. They keep us out of trouble, but cause trouble.
Yep.
The Hydra. Perfect.
Could not be a compliance officer or a doctor. Everything would be like, it's fine. That's fine. Rash, that's probably fine. I don't know.
Yeah. No, and so going, in the starting SmartRIA, and we'll talk, we'll dive into the business more side of it, but, how did, that kind of business or SmartRIA probably wasn't even possible maybe 15 years ago, right? Just because the technology wasn't there to even offer that that as a service, right? I mean, or was it there and it just hadn't been done yet?
So it actually was there. We were not the first company to the scene. We were maybe the 6th or something like that. Compliance 11 is the first that I know of. They got bought by Schwab in 2009 or 2010.
Okay.
And that became Schwab Compliance Technology.
Okay.
Which I think they just sold. But so there were examples of people out there doing what we wanted to do. But in general, I'm not very ego driven, but I do have an ego, and I always think I could do better than that. That was kind of the point of view, is that okay, somebody else has done that, but it's okay, we can do it better.
Mm-hmm. Hey everyone, quick pause here to let you know you can find more episodes at wealthpreservationpodcast.com.
Or if you want videos, you can go to YouTube, and we're also there.
Subscribe, and you'll be updated on our most recent guests and any other news we have coming out.
Thanks for listening.
Now, because we'll probably wrap up, and we'll dive more into what SmartRIA does, how you've grown as a company. But to give everyone an idea of where you guys are at today, give everyone a quick recap of just like when you launched, what you've scaled up to at this point, and I guess where you see SmartRIA going in the next 5 years.
Yeah. So we launched in January of 2016. That's when we launched the company. We launched the product to the market in the fourth quarter of 2016. Today we have about 2,500 RIAs using our platform. So we've scaled up reasonably well. A lot of our focus early on, because it had to be, was on smaller companies. Well, had to be. I can say that it's not necessarily true, but it's the focus that we chose at first. And since then, we've slowly but surely been, talking to our largest customers and saying, what can we do that will make this better for you? And really listening and thinking about that, and how do we translate that into software, and we started doing that in 2017, late 2017, and been doing it ever since, and working with progressively larger companies as we go. Yeah.
Awesome.
So real quick, Mac, when did you see this space? And you kind of, so you said someone had kind of launched it before, but were you kind of in the financial services side of it before? Or did you see this as a business? You're like, man, I want to, you kind of talked about it, compliance and things like that. But when you're like, this is an idea I think we can grow. And I know the RIA space was really kind of taken off there around that 14 to 16. As the wirehouses started to lose, people just got fed up with, brokers got fed up with the wirehouses, and they couldn't really be good advisors, right? And so when were you like, man, I just see this as a huge opportunity, and kind of what was that pivotal moment for you?
So I said earlier that one of the things that I like about startups and technology in general is that you can help people at scale.
Sure.
I mentioned my interest in psychology and creative problem solving and all of that kind of stuff. And really, that's who I am as a professional. I'm not a compliance expert. I'm not a wealth management expert. I'm someone who likes to help people and who likes to use technology to do it, and building companies to achieve those goals is what I do. SmartRIA is the largest of the companies that I've had the privilege to work to grow. But when I was in Startly, the other startup that I was leading, and came across the opportunity to help the wealth management industry with compliance, and spoke with Roger about the problem. Roger was a partner who was already well invested and wanted to see the solution come to life and succeed. And B, it was a really clear-cut problem in its essence. Like I said, it's hard to put your thumb on it, but at its most basic level, everybody understands that the federal government creates regulations, and those regulations have to be followed by the industry, and the industry will often struggle to do that to the standards of the government.
Right.
So it's a fairly straightforward problem, and I liked it immediately.
Yeah, Josh, what that kind of reminds me of? Kalen Larson, the Label Live. So Matt, it was another guy we had on. We're kind of like you. He was an outside the box thinker. He was a problem solver. He invented a smart label maker, right? Just a different type of label maker. And he's like, it's not like I have a background in label printers, right? It was just I worked with small companies, and this was like the biggest gap between hardware and software was the label printer.
Yeah.
And he was like, I kind of did it as a 2-week fun project, and it just took off like a fire, right? So it's, I think some of it too is just that creative thinking of like, okay, I now get the problem. This isn't necessarily my industry, but I get the problem. And from a fresh perspective, let me see if I can come up with fresh solutions.
And it's always interesting to me of people that do, compliance isn't like the sexiest business. You're not like, oh man, I run compliance. People are like, man, come over to my house for a party. Like, when can we?
You are one up on the list on CPA, right? I mean, I'll invite the compliance person before the CPA, but I mean, like.
No, but I love it. I love it when that people find the beauty and the for lack of a better term, the unsexy, or the the not the you're not solving world hunger and you're not curing cancer, but you found this amazing niche that had just huge hole in it, right? It was just this needs to be filled, and there's so many people that are clamoring for a solution, and it's kind of complicated, and it's kind of and there's technology and trust me, financial advisors are not the most tech savvy group. I'm part of them, and they are not. And so I know you're filling a huge void there between just trying to make that happen, and running an RA firm has its own complications. And if you're trying to go raise money and build AUM and service clients, the compliance piece can take a huge time suck. And if you can, you're solving a huge need, right? But it's not something that it's not the coolest thing ever, right? But man, is it profitable, and is it a huge need? And I love that.
It is. I think that's the understatement of this conversation so far, is that compliance is not a cool thing.
Yeah,
it is not a cool thing. There's really nothing cool about what I do, except for I'm helping people and running a technology.
Yeah, but it's so necessary, and people will spend lots of money to let you take that off their plate because they hate it so much. And that's a beautiful business, right? That's amazing.
Actually, it's cool to me. I just don't know if it's cool to other people.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I always joke, it's like owning like a trash company, right? Like, not awesome. There's people that are embarrassed to say they own trash companies, but holy cow, is it profitable, because everybody has trash and they hate it in their house. So they'll pay you to take it away and pay good money. It's things they hate to do, and you're solving a cool problem for them. I love it. That's really, it's amazing.
Well, we'll wrap up there. We'll go into a speed round real quick, but first, where can people go follow you, follow SmartRIA, and the cool work that you guys are doing?
So smartria.com is how you can find us. And we're on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook, and Instagram. Yes, we are a compliance company that is on Instagram. And
don't tell the SEC. Don't tell them. I love it.
And I am I'm on all those same platforms, but primarily I'm most active on LinkedIn.
Okay. Well, as always, listeners, those are going to be in the show notes. So go click follow. If you want to keep tabs on SmartRIA and what they're doing. All right, speed round.
Here we go.
Couple questions here. So, what misconception or mistake do you see most startups make?
Number one is not starting with co-founders.
Perfect. Yeah.
Don't do it yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love it. Question. Speed round question number 2. What leadership skills do you think are required to do a startup and grow it?
So I think you really have to like people and care about people, because startups are hard, and it requires people to get things done, and you have to support and nurture your team. The most important thing that I do, I think, as a leader, is make sure that my team is able to do their jobs, and I'm providing an atmosphere that is conducive to that and take stress away instead of adding it to their lives.
Right.
Well, I am looking forward to episode 2, because I put questions in there all about managing a team and building non-toxic work environments. Not business related. If any of our listeners are coming into Knoxville for one event, one citywide event, or something happening in Knoxville, what are you recommending they come in and see?
Man, if they like a sports spectacle, go to a University of Tennessee football game. You have to be okay with a ridiculous amount of noise and orange. But 100,000 people in the same place, all cheering for the same thing. It's an experience. Beyond that, I think the surrounding area and natural attractions from mountain biking and I forget how many 100 miles of greenways there are in Knoxville for all of those kinds of attractions. But also, of course, go an hour away from Knoxville and you can be in multiple different mountain ranges, including Great Smoky Mountains National Park, all kinds of water for paddling and water sports. So that's all stuff that natural attractions. And then Knoxville is a small town, comparatively speaking. It's a small city.
Yeah.
But I really like downtown. It's quaint. There are lots of local businesses as opposed to chains, and so I think downtown is worth a visit too.
I love it. Okay, and this should be a good question because you had a music startup, so this is right in that vein. You should knock this out of the park. So you get to bring one concert, any musician, dead or alive, to put on a concert here in Knoxville. What group? Who are you bringing?
The Beatles.
The Beatles. I love it. Yeah.
There you go.
Like early Beatles or mid Beatles or just the whole, like they get to play the whole.
Yeah,
the whole
I want to hold your hand Beatles. Let's do it in the road Beatles. I mean, what's the range?
So I like all of it, but I'm a really big fan of Rubber Soul Forward. It's kind of the Beatles 2.0.
Yeah.
And so anything in that era, I think, would be pretty exciting.
Well, Paul McCartney, if you're listening, and I know you are, let's get a Knoxville. I know it's not the full group, but we can't do that.
I just saw Paul McCartney in Knoxville.
He was here.
On my birthday.
Man.
One of 13 concerts that he had on this tour was Knoxville, Tennessee, which kind of blew my mind. And then it was on my birthday, and I was like, it's an expensive ticket that I'm freaking going.
Yeah, totally. That's it. Yeah.
You're like, it's an expensive ticket, but it's also the cheap ticket. Like, I'm not buying it. So it's a cheap ticket. Don't think about it.
He was the first concert to play at the Golden One Credit Union Arena in Sacramento when they opened it like 6 years ago. And the tickets were just through the roof. But I mean, that thing sold out in minutes. I mean, it was.
Yeah. And he, like, for as old as he is, because I saw him at Dodger Stadium. And, I mean, I think he did like 3 encores or something like that. And I mean, like, it wasn't until I realized, like, wait a minute, he's like in his 70s. And he was like, no break, no nothing, all over the stage.
He was less than a month away from 80 when I saw him on my birthday, May 31st. He played for 2.5 hours and sounded great. He was, like you said, he was, all over the stage. He was super engaging with the audience. Yeah. He's a badass.
Because not to throw him under the bus or anything, but I may or may not have had a family member who just went and saw Kiss, and they said that they do not sound like they used to. There may have been a performance decline in vocals, energy. I think they're like maybe propped up. I'm not sure, but yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
Well, perfect. Well, thank you so much for being on. Very excited to learn. Especially you've had lots of experience with startups, so just building that team, creating that that synergy within a team. That's a make or break for a lot of companies. You can have a great idea, and if it's got a bad team or bad leadership, it's just not going to take off. So very excited to hear more about that. But thank you again so much for being on.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, Mac, that was awesome. Great. Thanks for doing that. Just so you know, none of our guests have been paid to be interviewed. We don't charge for downloads. and we have never sold ads.
And though our wives and accountants wish we would, probably, this podcast is purely for the distribution of amazing stories and information only.
However, we do need to make one quick legal jargon-filled disclaimer. The information provided here is for educational purposes only. You should not construe any such information or other material as legal, tax, investment, or financial advice. Make sure you contact a professional before you decide to do something. If you have any questions, feel free to give us a contact or drop an email to info@wealthpreservationpodcast.com, or you are welcome to reach out to any of our guests using information provided in the episode.
Or in human speak, don't act solely on a guest that you heard on a podcast one time, because that would be dumb. Thanks.